going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video, and today we're talking about building your squad. This is pretty much for anything from the drafts that you're making now, and you will be through pre-season, right up until game week 1 when you finally make the squad that you're going to stick with to start the season off with. There's 5 kind of areas that I want to talk about. I'm going to give you my thoughts of things to consider when you're building your squad, players to think about, pre-season, all that kind of thing. And then at the end, I've got a sample squad which kind of incorporates everything into one. So let's kick off with the first one. So picking players is number one. Obviously, this is a pretty big part of FPL. You've got to pick players every single week, and especially for your game week 1 squad and your drafts that you're making pre-season. There's 15 players to pick all together. So you're going to go for a few of these tips. So first of all, limit the number of punts. And as a caveat to that, I will say FPL is supposed to be fun. If you want to fill your team with punts, you should absolutely do so. I'm just trying to give my kind of opinions on how I build my squads. Obviously, punts are fun. The problem is they're much harder to predict. So obviously, if you've got players from last year like Salah, Sterling, Aguero, Kane, etc., you know are going to score points. You'd expect them to carry on and do that next year. Whereas someone like Daniel James, who I've got on the screen, he might be someone that I would consider as a Man United fan. But obviously at 6 million, that's not too much money to spend, but he is a bit of a punt. There's no way of knowing how he's going to adapt to the Premier League. He might do well, he might not. So I would limit punts to kind of 1, 2, maybe 3 players to start off the season. Maybe play it a little bit safer and then see after game weeks 1, 2 and 3 who's doing really well. But again, FPL is about fun. If, for example, you're a Norwich, Villa or Sheffield United fan and you really want to have a bunch of your players in the team because you've not been in the Premier League for ages, it'd be cool to get them in, then you should absolutely do that. So don't go for no punts at all if that's not what you want, how you want to play. Put in as many as you like. But for me, I would do 1, 2, maybe 3 at the most. Be careful of promoted teams, so although I've just mentioned 3 of them, again, you don't know how they're going to adapt to the league. Yes, Norwich scored a load of goals last year and Sheffield United did pretty well defensively. Chances are they won't continue that coming into the Premier League. They'll concede less, or concede more even, and score less, so it'll be tougher for their players to get in the points. And a lot of them are actually priced quite expensively, like Pukki at Norwich is 6.5 million, so he's coming in against proven quality in the Premier League at the same price. So again, I would stay clear of promoted teams for the most part. Again, if you want 1 or 2, that's fair enough, but I wouldn't go all out on them. Keep a watch list, especially pre-season. You are going to go through so many different players. There's going to be bandwagons through kind of pre-season, how matches are going, and you'll think of a player and you'll decide why that's a good pick. And then a week later, you've forgotten you've even thinking about them. So if there's a player you look at and you see a really good stat or they've got really good fixtures and you want to remember that, write that down somewhere. Keep it on your phone, notepad on your computer, whatever it might be. And when it comes to actually building your game week 1 squad and finalising everything, you might remember a player you thought of way back when, which hasn't been in your mind, that you want to put back in your team. So definitely keep a watch list if you can. And don't get bogged down by coverage. Now, coverage is basically, pick it, like for example, if you can't afford Salah, maybe you pick like Fabinho instead because he's cheaper. For me, I would ignore coverage, especially for attackers. I would weigh up what one attacker is like versus another. So, for example, a lot of people will look at Bernardo Silva and De Bruyne instead of Sterling because they're cheaper because they're trying to cover Man City attack. But if you think Sterling's going to get all the points, it doesn't matter which other attacker you've got. The only time I would say coverage is okay for me is in defence. So if you've got a £6 million defender and a £5 million defender that are both nailed in the same team, yes, the £6 million one is probably priced higher for attacking returns, but when it comes to getting clean sheets, they both get the same amount of points for that. So if you want to cover a defence in the cheapest way possible, for example, if Zinchenko at Man City became a first team regular, I would happily pay $1 million less than Laporte to get the same clean sheets, even if maybe he's not quite as good at bonus or attack and return. So ignore coverage for the most part, especially in attack. So pre-season matches have already started now, and they're going to continue obviously right up until game week 1. And a lot is made about results and stuff like that. For me, if a team goes and absolutely smashes a kind of a team, another team that you've never heard of from another country, 8, 9, 10-0, obviously they're not likely to carry that over into the Premier League. Not many teams in the Premier League get beat 8, 9, 10-0. And on the flip side, if they're getting absolutely smashed, that's not necessarily a worry either, especially right at the start of pre-season when they probably haven't got their full 11, they probably haven't even got their full squad, and obviously players are just getting back into the swing of things. So for results, I don't really worry about them too much, unless they maybe go for a run of 4, 5, 6 losses. against teams they really should be beating. But for the most part, I don't look at it. The key things I do use pre-season for is to identify formations. Obviously, you know, for example, Chelsea have got Lampard in. Is he going to go for 4-2-3-1? Is he going to play a 4-3-3? Our teams that switched to 3-5-2 last season, like Wolves, going to carry on with that. So identifying how a manager wants to set their team up in pre-season is pretty good. Obviously, you've got to take into consideration what players are available. Some will come back late. They might not be, you know, might not have the personnel to play the formation they want to. So you've got to look at it over the course of the whole pre-season, not 1 or 2 matches in isolation. And again, track likely starters. Again, at the start of pre-season, you'll probably see teams kind of swap. You know, they'll play one team in the first half and they'll completely switch in the second half. But as it gets closer to the season starting, we'll probably see more of the first team players play more often. So you can track how often they play, and then they're obviously going to be the likely starters. So another example where that would be useful is Leicester. So they've just signed Perez. A lot of people thinking about him, but if he doesn't get that much game time in pre-season, he might just be a backup. And also, you know, formation-wise, you want to see where the likes of Maddison play. Does he stay as number 10, or does Perez play there and Maddison gets pushed a bit further wide? So those kind of things are the things you want to look out in pre-season. And how likely will form, you know, continue into the league. For every Salah that absolutely smashes it pre-season, then smashes it in the Premier League, there's a Boselli or a Moses or someone like that doesn't. So I don't take form too much into consideration in pre-season. If it's a really great player that's come from another league and they then keep it up in the top team, so, you know, if Pulisic comes in and does well for Chelsea, then maybe I'll look at that. But if it's someone that hasn't been reliable in the league and suddenly they smash it in pre-season, I'd still be pretty wary about putting them in my team. Allocating funds is up next, and I'm going to talk about squad structure in a minute. But in terms of where to spend your money, most of the money should be spent on your first 11. Money on the bench gets 0 points. Obviously, there are situations where maybe a player gets injured or suspended. You don't want to transfer them out of your team, so you put them on the bench and play one of your bench players instead. So that's a possibility. But as a general rule, they stay on the bench and then you don't use them. So they get no points for you unless they come off, of course. So I don't spend too much on the bench. I'll probably have a 4 million keeper and I'll just play a 4.5 million keeper every single week and just leave the other one to rot on the bench. I'll probably, if I play 4-4-2, I'll probably have a 4.5 million pound striker that doesn't play. But then I'll definitely have a defender that plays and a midfielder and someone like Dendoncker that plays. So that'll give me at least 2 players off the bench as and when I need them. So you don't want to buy a full set of 4 non-starters because your bench will be needed at times. It's very rarely that you need everyone off the bench. So I don't spend too much money on it. Your first 11 is the team that you play every single week. They're going to get the majority of the points. So that is where I will put most of my money. And obviously you want to look for value. So goalkeepers, for example, yes, premium keepers score really big points. But 4.5 million keepers, because they can get the odd clean sheet here and there, because they get save points as well, because obviously their team's not as good defensively, so they let more shots in, so the goalkeepers have more chance to save shots. And some of those 4.5 million keepers can really rack up points. So I look at that, something like that. And obviously when we come on to squad structure, we'll talk about defenders and stuff like that too. For me, squad structure is pretty important. I like to have 1 to 2 good captains start off with, preferably 2. And these are players that I'm happy to captain every single week for the most part. Obviously, the plan would be to have 2 players that alternate pretty well, so they've got a good fixture every week. If there's the odd one here or there where they haven't got the greatest fixture, that's not a problem. They're still got a more chance of scoring than maybe a lower valued player. Yes, it's fun when you nail that punt or that low owned player as a captain, but obviously it is a bit harder to predict. So I like playing it pretty safe with captain, like Salah, Sterling, Kane, Aguero, those kind of players. I also like to be able to get most players in a minimum of 2 moves. So, for example, if you set your team out to be 5 at the back, maybe a 5-4-1 formation, and rather than get any premium players, you spread it around. So you've got kind of £7 to £6 million defenders, and then perhaps like the likes of De Bruyne and Sigurdsson and Zaha across your midfield. When your money is spread like that, it makes it harder to get a really high-priced player like a Salah or a Sterling, or maybe an Aguero up front. You've maybe got to make 3 or 4 moves to afford them. So if you set up and say a 4-4-2 or a 3-4-3 and you've got some premium players in there, it makes it a lot easier to switch about. So as an example, if I've got Salah and Sterling in my midfield and 2 6.5 million forwards up front, obviously I'm not going to have money in the bank to get those 6.5 million forwards right up to Kane or Aguero, but I can do it in 2 moves by getting one of my premium midfielders. And obviously you might not want to do that, but that's a kind of decision you have to make. So that's something to think about. And also, when it comes to kind of pricing and squad structure, if you think of a player like Maddison versus Tielemans and you're stuck between which one to get, if you go for Maddison, then you can easily drop down to any 7 million or less midfielder. If you've got Tielemans and no money in the bank and suddenly Maddison absolutely smashes it, then you've got to find 0.5 million from somewhere. So I wouldn't just go for the more expensive player just because of that, but if you're pretty stuck between two, that could be the deciding factor, so something to think about. Premium defenders offer good points per match, so we talk about this every season. There has been a shift to the attacking fullbacks like Trent and Robertson, obviously Van Dijk week in, week out getting clean sheets. They offer really good points per match, very comparable to kind of forwards and midfielders that cost a lot more money. Now the key is you're probably more happy most of the time to rely on a striker to get you a big score as your captain. So you can't just go for big defenders, but especially at the start of the season, I find them a little bit more easier to predict. You're pretty happy that Liverpool are going to keep clean sheets. You're pretty happy Man City will. So putting a lot of money into their defenders is probably okay in game week 1. Whereas with attackers, especially those cheaper ones at 6.5, 5.5, maybe you're not quite sure which ones are going to fire at the start. So it might be worth putting the money more in defence and then shifting that forward as we find out who the form attackers are. That's one tactic you could do. And then just to talk about 3-4-3, not as good as it once was. Obviously, a lot of teams now are playing with one striker. You've got the likes of Mane and Salah inside forwards that are coming in all the time and getting goals. So midfielders have lots of points now. You can see that in the way the pricing has been done. And like I said, defenders have a really good points per match. So a lot of people are looking at kind of 4-4-2 this season. That could be the way to go. So 3-4-3's worked really well in the past, and there's nothing to say that it won't do that again this year. But just don't rely on it heavily. If you want to go for a different formation, that's absolutely fine. Just make sure that your squad is set up in a way with a good structure that you can move players around easily. Form versus fixtures is something you're going to hear about a lot during the season. People have their own opinions either way. I'm very much a fixtures man. I'd much rather go with someone with good fixtures than to buy someone with good form who's got awful fixtures. Now, there are certain caveats to that. For example, if Salah had maybe 2 top 6 teams in 4 or 5 fixtures, then I'd probably still bring him in because he's got a chance of scoring points in those big games, and they've got 3 easier fixtures. But for a cheaper player, I like to go for fixtures ahead of form, and especially in game week 1. So I tend to look 4 to 6 fixtures ahead. A couple of reasons for that. It's very hard to plan further out. Obviously, we'll get further knowledge of who's playing, who's in form, and things will change after 4 or 6 weeks. There'll be players we didn't even think about for game week 1 teams that we suddenly want. So there's no point in looking too much further ahead than that. And also there's the early wild card. I tend to play it quite early within the first 6 weeks. So again, all that planning, if you go further than 4 to 6 weeks, goes out the window because on a wild card you can completely reset your team. So not saying you have to early wild card, but the option is there. And I still think either way, whether you plan for the wild card or not, 4 to 6 fixtures is a pretty good time span to be looking at, and that would include the whole season to me. Form may not be reliable, so yes, you've got pre-season form, but I don't take too much attention to that. And obviously you've got last year's form as well, but it doesn't mean that a player is necessarily going to come off last season and go straight away and score loads of points at the start of the season. So you've obviously got the players that you expect to do it week in, week out, Sterling, Salah, etc. They've also got good fixtures as well anyway, so there's not really a problem. But for everyone else, fixtures will be the key to what I look for. So Bournemouth, for example, 2 promoted teams straight away. Chelsea in the opening 4 fixtures have got 2 promoted teams and Leicester at home. Yes, Man United away is not great on the opening day, but if you look at the first 4 fixtures, they're okay. So not saying I would definitely go for players from those teams. We'll have to see kind of who's starting, and that's where pre-season comes into play. But yeah, for fixtures for me are really important when I'm building my squad. Definitely something I look at, and for me, fixtures over form. So this is a bit of a sample draft that I put together, which I think incorporates everything I've kind of talked about. So starting at the back, I've gone for my 4 million bench goalkeeper that's not going to play unless Ryan gets injured, but I'm fine with that because I'll just play Pope week in, week out. I've got to still wait and see if Pope is the number 1 at Burnley, but it's looking quite likely that he will be. So he would be in my team, play week in, week out. Then moving on to defence, like I said, big defenders are good points per match. And good fixtures to start with. Robertson and Van Dijk, 2 Liverpool defenders, and then Luca Dean as well, who did really well last season, and Everton have got good fixtures. And then I would look for value in 2 4.5 million defenders. So this is a 4-4-2 squad. Then Donker, a 4.5 million forward, and then one of my defenders would be on the bench. So I would look for rotation there between kind of Diop and Taylor maybe, or other 4.5 million defenders. So there's value there potentially, and obviously big points potentially as well. If they can keep clean sheets, get attacking returns and stuff like that, for 4.5 million they could return really well. Then in the middle, I've got my two midfielders, Salah and Sterling, who are basically my 1 to 2 captains. Two captains pretty much every week. They've got a good fixture for the first kind of 10 game weeks. That's definitely something I want. And then again, talking about Everton, I've got Richarlison in there for the fixtures. We've seen how well he started the last 2 seasons. A lot of people looking at Sigurdsson. Richarlison has really smashed it the last couple of seasons. So in pre-season, if he's doing okay, I'll definitely look at him. And then Daniel James. So this would be, I don't know if I would go for this in my team, but this is just to give you an example of a punt. Most of this team is pretty safe. But Daniel James, let's see if he starts week in, week out in pre-season or game to game in pre-season, and he's looking pretty sharp. Then I might want to put him in because I'm a Man United fan, and I might want a Man United player in there. And he's only 6 million, so the risk is quite low. Obviously, you've got Sanchez at 7 million if he can get fit. But because the price isn't too much, I might be okay with doing that, having one punt in there. And then up front, I've gone for Vardy, who's Mr. Consistent. Leicester looking really good. They've got Tielemans back from last year. Their squad's looking healthy. As long as they can keep the likes of Maguire, I think they're looking good. He's really consistent, and Leicester have got really nice fixtures as well. So he comes in as a pretty consistent player who I'm not really looking to captain because I've got Sterling and Salah, but I really like him. And then King, a lot of people going for Bournemouth because they got 2 opening fixtures against 2 promoted sides, and I just think I basically want cover there. I am covering, which I've kind of said not to do, but I just think the Bournemouth attackers will all get points in those games. So rather than go for Wilson for 1.5 million more, I've gone for King, who's on penalties as well. So that's the sample squad, and that's kind of the thing that I would be looking at going into game week 1. Obviously, this will change lots because of new information and news we get running up to the first game. But right now, I think this looks pretty solid. So that's it for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and hopefully it was useful to you in some way. Have a think about the things I've said and incorporate them into the drafts that you're making now. And let me know in the comments below what you thought. If you did enjoy the video, make sure to give it a like, much appreciated as always, and subscribe if you're new around here. Hit the notification bell so you know when all the next videos are going live. I'm basically trying to get one out every other day at the moment, and I'll have another video on VAR and how it's going to affect FPL on Saturday. Probably release about 12 PM UK time, so keep an eye out for that one as well. And then obviously there'll be more coming right up until game week 1, including live streams, which should hopefully be back in the next week or so. I'm not going to do too many right up until game week 1, but there'll definitely be videos outside of that. So like, comment, share, subscribe, all of that good stuff, and I will catch you next time. Cheers all.